This is Catholic Forum. I'm Bob Krebs. Scott L. Smith Jr. is a Catholic best-selling author, attorney, and theologian based in Louisiana. Among his many books are Lord of the Rings and the Eucharist, Total Consecration to Jesus Through Mary, and The Cajun Zombie Chronicles. His latest book is published by Sophia Institute Press and is titled Near-Death Experiences. I'd like to welcome to Catholic Forum author Scott L. Smith Jr. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have that's quite a range from consecration to Jesus through Mary to zombie chronicles. What am I leaving out? What am I leaving out from your bio?
Oh, well, have 6 kids.
Oh, yeah.
Was in seminary for a while with the Jesuits. You probably mentioned I was an attorney, but you can feel free to leave out that part too.
Yeah, that's something that you're not too proud of. Is that? Do you still practice?
I do, yeah. I
Your bio in the back of the book says that you have 6 wild-eyed children. Why are
that's
they
right.
wild-eyed?
They always have that frenetic look in their eye, um,
God
running
bless
around the
them.
yard and doing crazy things.
That's great. So, in case some of our listeners might not be familiar with near-death experiences and also out-of-body experiences, which is also covered in your book, although it's not included in the title. Now, what are near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences?
Yeah, it's interesting because in modern times, as medical science has begun to really finally look into these kinds of more supernatural phenomenon and study them, uh, the the medical terminology has provided a series of characteristics that define a near-death experience, where you get that disembodiment, the out-of-body experience, the light in the tunnel, like the light at the end of the tunnel. Tunnel is very interesting because that tunnel, even though it's it's sort of a meme now, light at the end of the tunnel, and so it's readily available in people's vocabulary when they need to describe this experience. Um, it it has been described in various other ways through time, and um, that's why I think this is a fascinating project to approach the subject from a uniquely Catholic point of view, is because we can go into antiquity and beyond to talk about this subject. Beyond the light and the tunnel experience, you have some kind of life review and whether it's an angel or a divine person, or and sometimes near-death experiences are not all in heaven, which is also more unique to the Catholic discussion of this topic. There's purgatory, and then there's sometimes hell. Saint Teresa of Avila describes in her near-death experience going to hell, which is which is fascinating. I think all of us are, and well, should be focused and interested in the final things and how we ought to prepare ourselves.
I guess I've always mistakenly put out of body experiences and near death experiences in kind of in the new age category, but but what is the church's teaching on them?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I wanted to write this book, is because we need a safe harbor for Catholics that are interested in this subject, which is a large number. That if they're interested in the subject and want to read a book about it, they can either before this book. There's a couple other uh, personal accounts of near-death experiences, but before this book, nothing really comprehensive. So a Catholic that's interested in the subject would either have to go to a book written by a Protestant, which is
Mm-hmm.
going to kind of omit certain things that don't jive with that theology, or in a much more dangerous place, New Age
Mm-hmm.
books about this topic. So it's interesting. There's nothing really on point about it, like let's say in the Catechism,
Right.
but we have Pope St. Gregory the Great, and doctors of the church like Teresa of Avila describing the subject. And I think even biblically, we have some, if we analyze if we look at some of these stories in the Bible through the framework of a near-death experience, it can be enlightening and fortifying for our faith.
So how did the book come about? Were you just a topic that kind of that you were fascinated with, or?
It's interesting because I am, you can kind of tell from my bibliography, I am fascinated with supernatural things. But I was always a little skeptical about near-death experiences. There was a family member that had a near-death experience, and I don't know, I was just always a little skeptical about, well, is this just the brain doing things we don't understand, or is there something more here? And I was told, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a non-denominational Protestant, evangelical Protestant, and he had just written a book on near-death experiences. And he was like, Scott, are there any books out there talking about this from a Catholic point of view? Because I can't find any. And I couldn't really find any either, apart from, again, personal accounts. And so that's how I started to write this topic. And I said, Lord, if this is really something that you're calling me to do, to undertake this project, please provide me with extremely orthodox Catholic teaching on this subject, because there seems to be a lot of new aginess to this that's really polluting the topic. And boy, God really did provide.
The when you talk about the near-death experience, that would probably be obviously someone who has died or is close to death, and then they have this experience. And then, how about out-of-body experiences? Are all near-death experiences out-of-body experiences, and can you have an out-of-body experience without the near-death experience?
Like, are all squares rectangles and all rectangles? Yeah.
Right.
No. Yeah. It's an interesting question, because I do include in the book, like, for example, Father Cedric, who Pesegna, who is, you might have seen him on radio or other places, is still alive. He had a quote unquote near death experience, though he wasn't near death. It was an out of body experience that had all the rest of the characteristics of a near death experience.
Gotcha.
Or Kevin Wells as another contemporary figure, author, priest and beggar. Well, he's an author of Priest and Beggar, not author, comma, priest and beggar. Great author. And he still doesn't remember his near-death experience. His near-death experience is told from perspective of a third party, a priest who is in the room doing the anointing of the sick, Father Stack. And so some of these fit neatly into a box, and some just don't. And that's what's interesting, because as science studies this, they have to have kind of a rigorous schema to be able to analyze. And even so that they have to limit it to specific things, you're still seeing in persons that are resuscitated, the percent, based on several studies, is it hovers right around 10% of people have this phenomenon and remember it. Right? It's a key thing.
You mentioned modern science. What does modern science say about near-death experiences? They say it's a trick of the brain, or what is what do the scientists and doctors say?
Well, I think generally speaking, they're still gonna put this in the box of just can't explain yet, that there's got to be some kind of natural explanation for it. But you have several studies now that have been undertaken in multiple high-profile institutions across multiple continents, and over longitudinal a good bit of time that have that that have described things that just can't be explained naturally. Um, it's not that they necessarily opine about the metaphysical, but they're presenting the data that shows that people, despite being unconscious, are able to know what's happening to them in the room, happening outside the room, able to see things from above in the room. For example, they will outfit cardiac unit hospital rooms with a picture that's laying flat on a shelf in the hospital room, so that you can only see the picture at all if you're above, if you're somehow high up in the room.
Hmm.
And I think it's wonderful that science is beginning to study those things which just don't fit a purely natural explanation.
Yeah. So when somebody comes back to life and they mention the picture, they actually can prove that they were up above looking down. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is what science is supposed to do, right? Uh, we're supposed to use that rational part, that our soul, which is we were given reason by God, and we can use the experimental method, which the church gave us, to develop experiments that can be a foundation for our faith, that can prove the things that we might only believe on faith.
If you're just tuning in, my guest this week on Catholic Forum is author Scott Smith. The book is titled Near Death Experiences from Sophia Institute Press. Scott, what does your book say about heaven, hell, and purgatory?
Yeah, well, I think one of the there's so many fascinating stories that people, saints we know, and we just don't know their full story, that have experienced heaven, hell, and purgatory, or souls coming to them from purgatory, like Saint Faustina and Saint Margaret Mary. Um, One of the interesting things that came out of this book that I never have really thought about before was those people that were taken or shown purgatory in their near-death experience. One lady was shown an uncle of hers that was suffering in like one of the lowest pits of purgatory, and what was fascinating was that it was an uncle of hers from that side of her family that was not Catholic, and that would have that even to that point would have been anti-purgatory, anti-Catholic, not believing in purgatory. So the great irony is that one of them would end up in purgatory, and that part of the family would not be praying for that soul in purgatory. So it's this great irony that Protestants who don't accept the doctrine of purgatory are shooting themselves in the foot ultimately if they end up in purgatory, because their family won't know to pray for them unless they're Catholic, or will refuse to believe that they can even have efficacious prayer for them once they die. And it's only us Catholics that can help these souls, or that know to help these souls.
Yeah. So maybe we ought to pray for all the Protestants in purgatory, put that on our list of things to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
What about
especially.
heaven? Is it pearly gates and fluffy clouds? What do you learn? Is there a common thread through these stories?
Yeah, I did not come across any descriptions of pearly gates, as such. Um, I think there were some interesting descriptions. Um, like Pope St. Gregory talks about a battle between the soul, between good and evil, that happens with the soul at death. Um, Father Cedric talks about, he describes the beatific vision in a more real way than I think I had yet heard put on paper, about like joy being not just an emotional feeling, but like a physical feeling that was radiating through him, like joy itself. Um, and then you also have like Saint Teresa of Avila, uh, who in life experienced some of the most beautiful parts of heaven, she's describing hell. Um, so just an amazing variety. You have Saint Paul. I argue that maybe if it's not demonstrable from Scripture, there is a likelihood that Saint Paul had a near-death experience, because it's so often, as in his own words, he says near death, and he survives a stoning, which is kind of hard to believe, um, that he didn't die and wasn't resuscitated after a stoning. We could go into that too if you want, but St. Paul himself talks about heaven and the inability of human tongues to describe what he saw and heard there. You've got Father Stephen Shire. This is a priest that Mother Angelica interviewed back a couple decades ago, who had a terrible car accident, and at nanosecond later, he is there before Christ in the particular judgment, and he receives the verdict of hell. He's sentenced to hell, and then he hears this beautiful feminine voice begin to advocate on his behalf, and it's the Blessed Mother, and she's begging her son for one more chance for Father Stephen. And it's funny, or it's remarkable. Again, it people don't remember these experiences immediately, and oftentimes there's a trigger or something that happens and it all comes flooding back. It's almost like they're using a part of their brain to remember the experience that isn't normal memory. Mm-hmm. And Father Stephen, when the flood of memories finally came back of his near-death experience, he was reading from the lectionary at Mass, reading from the Gospel, the passage about the fig tree that's given one more chance at life, one more chance to bear fruit before being ripped up and burnt. And he's reading this, and all of a sudden the lectionary starts coming towards him, just of its own volition. He's looking around his congregation, see if anybody else is seeing this, if this is just him. And it's just him. No one else is seeing this. But that trigger of thinking again about the fig tree brought it all back.
Very interesting. When you did your research for this book, Scott, what surprised you the most? Is there any one particular story that really shocked you?
Something that's still I feel like it's one of those things you want to tell everybody about. Some of the in researching some of the biblical possibilities for near-death experiences. I was reading the Midrash, right? Which is the Jewish commentaries on the Old Testament, reading the Midrash about Jonah, and like Jonah's an enigmatic figure. I mean, he's kind of strange, and if you just pick up the book of Jonah, like it doesn't always, everything doesn't make sense. But when you read the Midrash, the Jews help you start connecting the dots. And what the Jews believed was that Jonah was actually also another figure in the Old Testament, that they believe that Jonah was the unnamed son of the widow of Zarephath that Elijah resurrected. And so that tells us a couple things. A, that he was resurrected possibly twice in his life, when he's belched on the seashore from the belly of the great fish. It would be the second time. But also it tells you about his prophetic pedigree, that he would have been resurrected by Elijah, and then as he grew up would have become a disciple of Elisha, and then would have followed in the steps of Elisha, and that's why he was a prophet of such great renown. So that putting all that together about Jonah, and then how that all points to what Jesus is saying when he says, "This wicked generation will receive no sign but the sign of Jonah." That was mind blowing for me.
What's the bottom line? What do you want your readers to take away from the book?
I want them to take away from near-death experiences what what so far I think the church wants them to take away, what the doctors of the church have said about near-death experiences is, remember one day you're going to die, and to live, right, memento mori, to live a better life, and knowing that, to be ready for the particular judgment. One kind of eerie thing when I was writing this book, one of the priests that was helping me, kind of my touchstone to make sure I was getting legitimate near-death experiences, not ones that wandered into the New Age world. As we were talking, uh, his good friend, Father Mark Beard, when we're talking about near-death experiences, that Father Mark Beard, who people may be familiar with, he's from Louisiana, but he had kind of a lot of notoriety, died in a car crash right as we were talking about near-death experiences, and it was a car crash that was very similar to the one I just described with Father Stephen Shire. So, so I'll give you the words he gave in his last homily. Father Mark Beard is almost prescient, like he almost knew what was going to happen. He said, "You need to live your life, because the moment you die, that nanosecond, you are going to be before the throne of God in the particular judgment, and you want to live so that the judgment will be good." It's not a bad thing to have to rely on Mary's advocacy in that moment, and to have her virtues on us and her graces on us, but live so that you're not afraid of that moment.
Well, the book is titled Near Death Experiences. It's by Scott Smith. I guess the best way for our listeners and viewers to get a copy would be through SophiaInstitute.com.
Yes, sir. That is or support your local Catholic bookstore.
Absolutely. We always need to do that for sure. Scott, thank you so much for being with us on Catholic Forum today. And go enjoy those wild-eyed children of yours.
If I don't enjoy them, they'll enjoy me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.